Now my phone's gonna die in the recording. It's a breezy spring day in Oklahoma City, April 19th, 1995. The usual crowds buzzing in and out of the Murrow Federal Building. Parents dropping their children off at American Kids Daycare on their way to work. Government workers pouring themselves a cup of coffee before sitting down for a meeting. Impatient civilians tapping their feet as they wait in line at the Social Security office. Little do they know, in a matter of seconds, their lives will never be the same. As the clock strikes 9:02, the truck parked outside the main entrance explodes in a fiery blaze, sending out a catastrophic shockwave that damages all buildings in a 16-mile radius. When the smoke clears, 168 people are dead, including 19 children. We remember this day in history as the day of the Oklahoma City bomb. Until 9/11, this was the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil. In addition to the 168 people who were killed, about $652 million in damage was done by the explosion. The mastermind behind the bombing was a very disgruntled veteran, Timothy McVeigh. He felt that our government was very corrupted and was very upset at the way the FBI handled the instances of the Waco siege and the standoff at Ruby Ridge, and felt that the U.S. government needed to be taught a lesson. So he decided to bomb the Murrow Federal Building in Oklahoma City. McVeigh was caught relatively quickly and was tried and later sentenced to death by lethal injection on June 2nd, 1997. About 4 years later, in the summer of 2001, McVeigh's sentence was carried out. And the purpose of my speech today is to show that this was not only the correct action, but a justified action through the Bible as well as the Constitution. Before we get into that though, I just want to give you a quick background of capital punishment in the U.S. It was suspended in 1972 due to protests that it was violating the 8th Amendment's prohibition on the use of cruel and unusual punishment, but was later found by the Supreme Court to be constitutional and was reinstated in 1976. Currently, 37 out of the 50 states have some form of capital punishment, including the federal government, who uses on political prisoners. However, in 3 of those 37 states, Massachusetts, Nebraska, and New York, the death penalty has been suspended in its use due to protests that it violates the state constitution. And however, attempts to have capital punishment repealed in those states have been unsuccessful to this point. There are 5 forms of capital punishment in the U.S. today. They are lethal injection, the electric chair, the gas chamber, firing squad, and hanging. Since its reinstatement in 1976, there have been 1,099 death sentences carried out. Here we have a pie chart of all the death sentences carried out since 1976. The most common form of capital punishment by far is lethal injection, making up for 85% of the death toll, or 929 out of the 1,099 death sentences. After lethal injection is the electric chair, which makes up 14% or 154 deaths. That's followed by the gas chamber with 1%, and then the firing squad and hanging with 0.5%. And these statistics are as of April of 2008. Now let's switch gears and get into the biblical argument for the justification of capital punishment. If you look in the books, Old Testament books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, you will see crystal clear declarations and evidence that committers of various heinous acts were punishable by death. These acts include, but are not limited to, murder, adultery, bestiality, witchcraft, kidnapping, homosexuality, false prophecy, prostitution, and rape. This shows that capital punishment is not only just, but it was also first implemented by God as a consequence for sin. Now, does that mean that if someone commits one or more of these acts and is not put to death, that justice has not been served, or the biblical argument is a contradiction? No, not at all. Let's look at King David, for example. He was guilty of murdering Uriah the Hittite after committing adultery with Uriah's wife, Bathsheba. Yet he was not killed or put to death. This is not a contradiction, but this is the expression of God's limitless and wonderful mercy and love. Put quite simply, committers of such crimes are worthy of death, but God chooses to spare some in His desire that all will come to repentance and be saved, and be restored to a right relationship with Him. Now let's look at the death penalty in the Constitution. Does the death penalty violate the 8th Amendment prohibition on use of cruel and unusual punishment? With the painful and somewhat drawn-out forms of capital punishment, such as the electric chair and the gas chamber, I can really see where they're coming from with this argument. This argument has resulted, I believe, in a trending towards exclusive use of the lethal injection as the only method of capital punishment. As you saw in the pie chart, 929 out of the 1,099, or 84.5% of all death sentences that have been carried out since 1976 have been by lethal injection. Looking even closer and more recently, we see that out of the last 443 death sentences have been carried out by lethal injection. That's almost 99%. Let's look at the Supreme Court rulings on the issue. Now, there have been many instances where the Supreme Court has gotten together to discuss whether death penalty is constitutional or unconstitutional, and during the deliberations, they've always focused on 3 factors. Number 1, defining cruel and unusual punishment. 2, the public approval rating. And 3, related amendments that may justify the death penalty or may show that it's not justified that we use the death penalty. Let's look first at defining cruel and unusual punishment. Now this is what the Supreme Court has ruled as the definition of cruel and unusual punishment. Cruel and unusual punishment is whether a crime is appropriate or excessive for the crime that was committed. That's really what it boils down to. I mean, I'm sure we would all be in agreement with saying if someone was guilty of jaywalking or parking in a non-parking zone, the death penalty will be excessively cruel and unusual for that situation. However, I'm pretty sure that most of us would deem death penalty appropriate for someone who would kidnap a little child, rape and murder them, chop them into tiny little pieces and bury them in the woods. I'm pretty sure most people would say they are worthy of the death penalty. So now let's look at the public approval rate. The majority of the public to this day still supports the death penalty. As of October 2010, the poll that was conducted revealed that 64% approved of the death penalty, 30% opposed it, and 6% were neutral. Now, for the most part, that's where it's been fluctuating for the last 10 to 15 years or so, between 60 and 70% approval and 30 and 40% disapproval. So nothing really new there. Related amendments. Now, in addition to defining what cruel and unusual punishment is, they have reinforced their justification of the death penalty with the Fifth Amendment. Now, the Fifth Amendment says that no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. And so what the Supreme Court has ruled that this amendment implies is that as long as due process is being carried out, meaning as long as everything is done by the book during the arrest, everything is done by the book during the prosecution and trial, everything is done by the book during the sentencing, then the death penalty is justified through due process of the law. And in conclusion, we've seen that there are solid arguments on both sides here. However, I believe that the weightier evidence is on the side of the death penalty being justified by the Constitution and by the Bible versus being unjustified by the Bible and the Constitution. That being said, the death of any human being, no matter how evil, should never be cause for celebration, should never be met with joy, should never take pleasure in people's suffering or death. There are also innocent people who have been wrongly accused of crimes and been sentenced to death unjustly. But so was Christ. Where would we be if Jesus wasn't wrongly convicted and put to death for all the crimes that we committed? I think this shows that since God implemented the death penalty and has not seen fit to remove the death penalty, I think that shows that God hates sin and loves justice so much that it is worth the death of the occasional innocent person. I mean, our justice system is not that incompetent that, innocent people are being put to death by the thousands. It's not like that at all. And for the few cases that are wrongly put to death, we can rest assured and fear not, because God rights all wrongs in eternity. Thank you.